everybody. Thank you all for coming. In the name of the Institute of International Relations, I would like to say that it is an honor and pleasure to introduce Professor Cynthia Enloe, who will give us a talk entitled, "Why is a feminist curiosity so crucial?" Cynthia, you are very, very happy and lucky to have you here at PUC-Rio. Cynthia Enloe is research professor in the Department of International Development, Community and Environment at Clark University, where she served as chair of the Department of Political Science and as director of Human Studies. Professor Enloe has been awarded Clark University Outstanding Teacher Award 3 times. Professor Enloe's feminist teaching and research have focused on the interplay of gender politics in the national and international arena, with special attention to how human labor is made cheap in globalized factories and how humans' emotional and physical labor has been used to support many governments' war-waging policies, and how diverse humans have tried to resist both of these effects. Some of her publications include Banana, Beats and Bases, Making Feminist Sense of International Politics, among many other feminist interventions. Cynthia, your reflections about gender, women and power have been an important source of inspiration for us, for our academic work and teaching at the Institute, helping us to develop a deeper and more complex understanding of global politics, for our curriculum, and above all, to broaden our curiosity. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Okay, we have a whole techie thing going on here. So I'm not using that, I am using that. And you guys, you all can hear me in the back? Okay. Hi, everybody. This is why this day is so good, right? I mean, you have a real community here that, you know, responds and listens to each other. Wait. So it gets back to about you all, but it doesn't get back to you. This is the insider-outsider thing. Okay, so let's be honest. But it's all about just simple technology. So let me really ask, those of you who are sitting in the kind of last half of the audience, is it really hard to hear? I mean, do you have to really strain, or you just can't hear at all? Yeah, well, see the people in the back, what is with this? So those of you in the very back, you can hear, but there's some dead space. You know, it's like, you know, the internet. You're just, oh dear. Okay, well, let's give it a try, and if it really becomes too annoying, let me know and I'll start talking from the middle of the hall. Should we try the other mic and see? Did it work when Marta was speaking? So let's, okay, forget it. See, low tech is what you want. Right? Yes. So it's my great pleasure and it's really an honor to be here. I've been here for a week and met a lot of you. And I want to thank Zhao especially for inviting me, and for all the students and especially the student interns who made sure that I got around and I didn't get lost or just stayed walking on the beach, which I would have done. But it's been a wonderful week of exchange and conversation, and for me, a lot of learning. And so when we thought, when John and I were talking about what might be the topic or the title of the talk, I deliberately chose something that was a bit vague, and said, in these times, in this world, why is a feminist curiosity more crucial than ever? And that in these times means that all of us have to think, so what are these times? For those of us who are making our lives currently in the United States, we are likely to think that these times are Trump times. But here you have very particular things you're struggling with, and they define your times. One of the things that seems to be affecting so many of us in these times, in this world, are various forms of militarism. And that's really what I want to talk about tonight, but I want to talk about it in ways that perhaps most of us don't usually talk about it. I want to talk about the gendering of guns. I'm very interested in big military weapon systems, not because, clearly not because because I like weapons, but because I'm very interested in who makes them, who sells them, who uses them, who makes it possible to get loans so that other people can buy them. I'm interested in all kinds of weaponry, not as machinery, but I'm interested in who's on the factory floor. I'm interested in who writes the treaties that make the sales possible, how that weaponry is used. And as a feminist, I'm interested, now we're talking about big weapons, fighter planes and armored vehicles, sophisticated radar, which I know Brazilian companies produce. I'm interested in them, but as a feminist, so if you ever have an occasion to do a feminist analysis of any of the Brazilian weapons makers, and I would encourage you all to think that maybe that's a research project. What I ask is, who's on the factory floor? Who's in the boardroom? Who are the main investors? And how do ideas about manliness and ideas about feminized skill together create a jet fighter plane? If you go into almost any jet fighter plane factory in the world, you will find that there's one department in a jet fighter manufacturing factory that is more feminized than any other. Now, I'm not an aerospace engineer, so I can't tell you all the ins and outs of what goes into a jet fighter plane, but what we know today is you cannot produce a highly sophisticated major weapon system unless you can wire. Wiring is more crucial to a military airplane than it was 50 years ago. It's becoming more crucial to the operations of these big, deadly weapon systems, like a jet fighter plane, than ever before. And wiring is presumed by male managers and defense contractor investors to be done best by women. We know this from the international electronics manufacturers, both in Brazil and in other countries, and it's no less true for major weapon systems. So that inside a jet fighter factory, it may be a highly masculinized process of designing jet fighters, of selling them, and at the user end of deploying them. But that doesn't mean there are no women involved in the making of jet fighters. They are in the wiring departments. And we know very little about what women or men think about working every day, or at least 5 days a week, oftentimes with overtime, on instruments of death. We know very little. Oftentimes when defense budgets are being promoted, working in the defense industry, building ships, planes, armored vehicles, are sold, the discourse is selling it to us as if it's all just about jobs. Usually quite decent paying jobs because they're imagined to be skilled jobs. And jobs hardly captures what's going on in somebody's mind when they are building a nuclear submarine or when they are part of wiring a deadly jet fighter plane. What do people think they are doing? And do women and men think the same thing about having a job for a defense contractor? I work with Swedish feminists, and they really woke me up. They said, Cynthia, I mean, I had really fallen totally into the trap, but they were warning me ahead of time. You know, your best friends don't wait for you to fall into the trap. You know, they put up the warning signs on the edge of the trap so that you don't fall in. And they said, remember, Sweden is a major arms exporter. It may be neutral in international state-to-state rivalries. It may not, at least in the last century, it used to be a colonial power, ask any Norwegian, but in the last century, it has not been a major combatant in interstate wars. But these Swedish feminists said to me, but don't think that means we're not militarized. To be neutral is not the same as to be demilitarized or even anti-militarized. So, for instance, is the Saab automobile sold here in Brazil? No, that's not so much. It's a popular car in North America and in Europe, SAAB, right? It's the competitor with Volvo amongst Swedish cars. Well, Saab, which if you ask most North Americans what is Saab, they'd say a major automobile manufacturer and exporter. Saab is one of the principal makers of jet fighter planes. Pardon me? Which is? Yes, that's right. Yes. But yes, you just bought weapons from Saab.
Yeah.
See, this is why it's just fighters.
Yes.
Ah, you are complicit in undermining Swedish feminism. There you are. Just in case you weren't feeling guilty when you came in. Now you've got something else to burden your souls with. Yes, Saab is a major marketer of large-scale militarized weapons. And what these Swedish feminists were saying is that it's been very difficult amongst Swedes to bring up the issue of the morality of Sweden being a major weapons producer and weapons seller. That because Saab is a major employer, and because Saab as a corporation seems to be not as sexist as some other Swedish commercial operations, it kind of has a good rep as a citizen. But it also is an employer of women and men to make instruments of death to be used in Brazil. The other thing that has been going on in Sweden, since now you've got this intimate connection with Sweden, and that is that Sweden has the first foreign minister in the world to come out and define her, Margot Wallström, W-A-L-L, Margot Wallström, who was a very senior diplomat in the United Nations, and when her party won power in Sweden, the Prime Minister appointed her foreign minister. Now, there are other women foreign ministers in the world, but Margot Wallström is the first to say that my country, in this case Sweden, my country's foreign policy is going to be a feminist foreign policy. And you can look up Margot Wallström, Google her, and find out what she means. But amongst what she means is that Sweden will not willfully engage in a foreign relations agenda that increases militarism in the world. So, one of her first acts as foreign minister 2 years ago now, was to end a very lucrative contract with Saudi Arabia. You'll be glad to know you're not the only ones who buy socks. So does the Saudi monarchy. You're in very good company. And she didn't end the entire weapons deal with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest customers for weapons makers around the world. Everybody courts the Saudis, even the Saudi government. But she ended one small contract to kind of make a point. Two things, because the Saudi government already was engaged in massive bombing of civilians in the war in Yemen, but also because the Saudi government is so profoundly patriarchal and unfair to Saudi women citizens. And she wanted to make both those points by canceling a not major, but a significant contract for military exchange of training. It was mainly a training contract with the Saudi government. And then what happened? Now her party had just won office, so it was a popular party in power. There were not just newspapers, not just bankers. Bankers are crucial to weapons making. All weapons manufacturing depend on bank loans. A banker may never appear in a military uniform and be deeply militarized. But bankers, the media, as well as the big weapons manufacturers in Sweden, stood up and ridiculed Margot Wallström for being a naive, always, feminist. As if calling for a country's foreign policy to be based on principles of human rights and women's rights and peace and genuine development, those were the four legs of her foreign policy, her feminist foreign policy, were somehow naive. So alive and well in Sweden is now a debate, in fact, about not just weapons manufacturing and weapons sales, but also what does it mean to be Swedish in the world today? That's the level of discussion that Swedes have with each other. And what does it mean to think of themselves as a less sexist culture and political system than most? It doesn't rank first, by the way. It's below Rwanda. That makes it fourth. The kinds of weaponry I want to talk about tonight, though, is at the seemingly the other end of the scale that's much more mundane. And that is small arms, and here's the term that is used in English in international policy discussions. So you watch, you'll start talking to somebody who's kind of an insider in this, and they'll start using this language. Small arms and light weapons. That means so that you can talk about landmines, and you can talk about grenades, and you can talk about grenade launchers, and night goggles. Night goggles are deadly, right? If they allow somebody with a gun to see you where otherwise they couldn't see you, night goggles are deadly. So small arms and light weapons is the overarching phrase that's used in international political discussions about what we would think of as the international trade in arms. Now Brazil is a major exporter of light weapons, and light should not mean light, oh, isn't that joyful? Light, right? Light means it's easier to carry a rifle than it is to carry a tank, right? So light weapons really is to distinguish them between light weapons and heavy weaponry, and that categorization is very common in international politics. For years, there have been efforts by reformers to try and get some kind of international control on the trade in guns and rifles, light weapons. I kind of got involved in this as very much somebody that, again, people thought they had to tutor. we talked about this before, lots of people are constantly trying to tutor me, which is a good thing. But it does mean that I'm constantly being warned not to think the things that they think I think. And they're too often right. So I became involved with this next group of people trying to tutor me. About 6 or 7, could be 8 years ago. It was a long campaign. There was a special United Nations General Assembly discussion. This is one of the things that happens in the United Nations. General Assembly will have open discussions on major topics periodically. And there was an open discussion in the United Nations on the trade in light weapons, in rifles and guns, and how serious it was, how damaging it was, how in need of international agreements to limit the sale of rifles and guns and other forms of light weaponry. And at the end of that big meeting in New York at the UN, a small group of women, I think there were probably maybe 4, just a handful, they called together another handful of us. I think around the table, maybe there were 12 of us, a couple of guys, maybe a majority women, but women and men, but led by women, who said, as hard as it is to get the international players, and that's the manufacturers, the traders, the investors, and the governments, not to mention the users of weapons, as hard as it is to get them to have an open, public, serious discussion about the damaging consequences of unbridled trade in rifles and guns, as hard as that is, when it does happen, it happens as if there are no workings of gender going on at all. And this tiny group that got a little bigger group around a table in an office building across from the United Nations in New York said, but we know you cannot have an effective control of guns and the trade in guns if you do not have a feminist curiosity. Because you won't know where the guns are, you won't know how they're used, you won't be able to explain why so many men are so committed to having the right to own guns and to hold them privately. They were making an argument that the hard-working reformers, most of whom were men, that were calling for the control of the international gun trade, that those hard-working reformers still were resistant to any gender questioning about how guns operate in the world. And this little group came together in New York over very stale coffee, as I recall, to try and say, how can we persuade, now this is, how can we persuade the good guys to ask gender questions, to be smarter about what kind of goal they are after. And amongst the people who they started working with, this handful, were local women's activists, and they were in very particular places. One of the most active group of grassroots women working on guns, that is where they are, how they're used, why the holders of them are so committed to not giving them up, were women in Mali. It was really surprising to me, and I don't, if you're looking for research on it, I don't quite know why women in Mali particularly began to organize around the feminist commitment to gun control and women's, whether they're feminists or not, women's stake in increasing the international control of the sale of guns. But the Mali women were good, and one of the things they taught us all is how do you do research on guns? And one of the things they tutored us in was, who knows where guns are in a household? I'm not going to ask you how many guns there are in your household, right? Or if you know, or if you only have a hunch there's a gun in your household, but you're not sure. But what the Mali women said is, if you ever want to control guns, you've got to bring women on board because they are most likely to be the ones who know where the guns are and don't have a commitment to holding on to them. The people who own the guns and are committed to never giving them up, they know where they are. They know if they've separated the ammunition from the rifle itself and where they keep the ammunition and where they keep the gun, because it's harder to hide the rifle than it is to hide the ammunition. But women, because they do housework, women, because they are around this place called home so much, they are most likely to know where guns and ammunition are in households. If you don't bring, this is what the Malian women were saying, if you don't bring women on board, you will never be able to have an effective divestiture of guns at the local level. Now, the other women who became very important in this campaign, this is now a 10-year campaign to do two things: to change the minds of the, if you will, good guy reformers so that they would be more gender smart about what kind of solution are you going to craft and how are you going to implement it. So to change their minds, the ones that are the gun reformers already, but to get them up to speed so they, if they don't know how to ask gender questions, and most of them didn't, they at least realized they needed a Malian woman standing next to them to give them a clue. Because one of the things that these women that I first met with, this was shocking to me. It shouldn't have been, I guess, but I was still, it's good to be still shocked, right? If you're totally unshockable, it's very depressing, right? So admit when you're shocked, it's hopeful. You thought better of humankind than was the case in reality. But one of the things that these women gun reformers said is that hang out with the men who are in the forefront of the small arms light weapons trade control movement. These are the reformers. Hang out with them. And said, you will hear them talk about guns really intimately. And with each other, they are likely to brag about how fast they can take apart and put back together an M16. That is, they had built a masculinized kind of credibility as a seemingly critic of guns by proving that they knew guns in a way that virtually none of the women reformers had any stake in at all. They didn't want to handle them. They didn't want to prove they knew how to take them apart and put them back together. They had no stake in that kind of militarized skill and to show it off. So there was something deep going on in the masculinization of the reform movement that these women wanted to change. The second thing they wanted to do, this is how really, so you know this, a lot of you have been involved in all kinds of reform and more radical change movements. You've got to have stamina. You cannot think in 3 years terms. You can't even think in 5 years terms. You have to, here's the thing, you have to both be impatient and have stamina. Which sounds like a contradiction, right? Because if you have too much stamina, you're not impatient enough. So you both have to have stamina for the long haul, but constantly be impatient about the level of and pace of progress. So the second thing that these women wanted to do was to make sure that in any eventual, if they were lucky enough to get this far, in any eventual international agreement on trade in arms, that there be specifically gender provisions inside the formal agreement. Now that was going to be much harder. So it took about 10 years for it even get to the point that it was going to be drafted, that it was reviewed, that it was debated, that it was voted on, it lost, and then it was redrafted, and then it came up again. And by April 2013, there was the point at which there was a full draft of an international treaty called the Arms Trade Treaty. And amongst all the campaigners, and not to mention their opponents who are fierce, it's called the ATT. And the Arms Trade Treaty, the ATT, had gotten to the point of being drafted, refined, intense behind the scenes and not so behind the scenes, bargaining about every provision and who would get on board. And who would get on board means that's state governments. That's the only people who get to vote on treaties, right? So you're talking about state governments. It's happening at the UN, so you're talking about delegations who are all state appointees for their countries at the United Nations. Women feminists around gun control, had created this international network, including women from Mali and also women from Brazil. Women from Brazil began to collect data on the uses of guns in domestic violence. Because one of the crucial things to, I mean, it would make sense to you as soon as you hear it, but you might not think about it. If a gun is used in an act of domestic violence, the likelihood of death goes up dramatically. Knives are horrifying. Machetes are horrifying. Punches with a fist can do terrible damage. Pushing a woman up against a bedpost can be horrifying. But when guns are available and used by somebody who is really angry at their spouse, usually a person in the role of a husband or a male partner, angry at his wife or his woman partner, and he has access to a gun, it is most likely she will die. So Brazilian women began to collect police data. They went to all the police records and began to make very systematic reports on the likelihood of guns being used in Brazilian cases of domestic violence and how likely it was that the object, the target of the violence, died as a result of guns being used in that act of domestic violence. And they contributed it to the General Assembly debate. Because one of the things that women activists from Mali and Brazil and the Philippines, who are also, Filipina feminists were also important, in showing that trade in guns has to be thought of as a risk for women. It wasn't just that trade in guns made any society more likely to engage in violence. It's that that risk is a gendered risk. It doesn't mean, as these women explain very, very carefully to the skeptical men in their states' delegations, it doesn't mean that women are arguing that men are never damaged by guns. It means that there is a different pattern of violence and of damage in the way in which guns are gendered. I was in Portugal at a meeting in Coimbra, a feminist meeting about peace. And over lunch, where, you know, lunch and beer, how would intellectual life go on without them? A woman from Portugal said that she had been doing her dissertation research here in Brazil. And she said, this is one of these little instant pictures that really sticks, or at least stuck in my mind, because this is now several years later, and I can still picture where she was sitting when she was telling this story. And she told it so clearly I feel as though I can picture the room that she's talking about when she's describing it. What she said was, and this is about how you have to be really serious in your understanding of the uses of guns, and you cannot just look at the guns that are fired. If you want to understand how guns distort relationships between people, not to mention animals, then you have to not just look at police records around who shot whom with what weapon. And here was her example. She said she was sitting at, because she had gotten to know a group of families that she was living amongst in a small Brazilian town, at Sunday lunch. And she said, it seemed to be a pleasant conversation, and at one point things got a little tense between the husband and the wife, and the husband turned to his wife, did not raise a fist, did not slam the table, just kind of leaned back in his chair and pointed to the corner in the room where a rifle was leaning. And that ended that argument. That is intimidation. How do you study intimidation? Intimidation means you've got to be much more ethnographic in your curiosity, whether you think of yourself as an ethnographer or not. How do you study intimidation? Feminists around the world have thought a lot about this, because this is what you have to do if you are trying to think through how sexual harassment works. You have to be able to figure out the racialization, the gendering, the class, the ageism of intimidation. And that will turn up in no police report. But it is one of the things that feminists want to bring into these very formal state-to-state negotiations about the Arms Trade Treaty. A group called peacewomen.org, and that's their website, but it's also, they use that as their name just to keep it simple. And they are a feminist group in New York. They're a transnational feminist group from women with activist roots all over the world. And they became the hub for organizing, because it's expensive to lobby the United Nations. First of all, you have to get to New York. Then you have to stay in New York for months oftentimes to do this kind of campaign. And you have to be able to move around. It's very expensive to lobby the United Nations. And so peacewomen.org became the hub for this transnational feminist campaign around the control of the trade, only the trade now, of guns, as we were going into what they hoped was the home stretch of the ATT state-to-state bargaining. And here's what they wanted to get into the ATT. They wanted to get in this provision. Now, a provision in a treaty means that any government that ratifies the treaty will be beholden to enforcing and on their own behalf carrying out that provision. Small print matters in treaties. Here's the provision that these feminists, after 10 years of work, because you keep thinking, what you're going to get into the treaty that will improve women's lives. That's the point. They wanted to get into this ATT. They want the majority of governments to agree with this provision that one of the criteria for determining whether a government should allow one of its own gun-producing companies to sell internationally any of its guns. Following the breadcrumbs here? Let me do it again. They want to get into the ATT, this provision, that one of the criteria, one of the standards that governments had to think about and try to determine was whether any one of their own home gun companies was selling any of their gun products overseas to any society in which those guns were likely to be used for the perpetration of gender-based violence. Now this is really radical. That means every government who ratifies the AT&T has to figure out how to measure that. I don't know about the Brazilian government, but the US government, many other governments are not really equipped to, because they've never thought they needed those measuring skills, those investigatory skills. So what the feminists wanted, they wanted that in the body of the treaty. Two things became really heated as sources of debate. The first is the term gender-based violence. Given where we are, I will just tell you that a government who's based in a city with the first initial R led the fight against that. And because in the United Nations, the Vatican does not always have the status of a state member of the UN, but it does on certain kinds of debates and agreements. In the ATT debate, they had the role, they were given the role by the other states of being a formal official observer, which meant they got into every negotiating room, which is sometimes really what you want. You want to know who's on what side, what are the most heated sources of debate. And because of that, they were able to build alliances. And they started building alliances amongst member states of the UN to reject the phrase gender-based violence. And you have to really be, a lot of you are skilled in discourse analysis, you have to really think why any government, in this case the one in R, would be so heatedly opposed to the phrase gender-based violence. It's because they hate the word gender. Because it seems as though it's a social construct, not a fact of human existence. But they got other governments. They couldn't do it by themselves. They got other governments to get on board. Governments that in fact wanted to have no responsibility for the use of guns in their countries, companies, client buyers, societies. They didn't want to have to think about how guns are used against women. The other debate was where to place, even if you put in that criterion, where to place it in a treaty. Now, I'm not an international legal person. I only kind of began to get a sense of why this mattered because, again, I was tutored by the transnational activists based in New York who were doing the negotiating. What those states who kind of wanted to look good but not do anything, that's most states, where they wanted that is gender-based violence should be taken into consideration. They wanted it in the prelude. Why? Because preludes of treaties are not enforceable. Things that are in the preludes make you sound good, make you look good, make you sound as though you're part of the 21st century, but really you don't have to do anything. The feminists wanted it in the body of the treaty because they wanted it something that states that ratified could be held accountable for not doing anything about it. And they did it. They managed to get gender-based violence as versus violence against women. They got gender-based violence into the treaty, and they got it into Article 7, which is an enforceable section of the treaty. Now, was this big news anywhere? I would have had not a clue it was going on. This is one of the major efforts in recent years to try and get a grip on the relationship between weaponry, masculinity, femininity, and women's lives, and states' accountability for the relationship between them. Did anybody cover it? One reporter for the New York Times, who is really very good at this, gave at least a couple of mentions of it. She's a very good reporter. But otherwise, it was because of women activists tutoring all the rest of us, and a lot of them were doing it at the grassroots level, as in Brazil and as in Mali and the Philippines. Now, the treaty passed, the AT&T passed, but for a treaty to go into operation, it has to have at least 50 governments ratify it. The government of Brazil was one of the first to ratify. Please do research on this and please send it to me. Because every ratification is quite a distinctive gender politics. For instance, would you find, if you did a study of this, that the current Brazilian government, in which as you know better than I do, the legislature is 90% men and 10% women, is that those 90% men all care about domestic violence against women. They hate guns. They wouldn't want the Brazilian manufacturers to make any profits over the international sale of guns, and they ratified it pronto. Or is there another explanation? And what is the explanation, and what was the role of women activists in the debate, and was there any debate, or was it just window dressing? But it's been ratified. It is now, when you ratify an international treaty, what a government is saying, it is now our law. It is Brazilian law because the ATT has been ratified by the Brazilian government. They may have meant for it to be window dressing. I should say here, as you can imagine, it's not even come to the floor of the U.S. Congress. There's not a chance that this treaty, which a lot of American reformers worked very hard on, but there's not a chance, given the current administration, but even under Obama, there was no chance that the ATT was ever going to come up in front of the Senate, which is the body of the U.S. government has to ratify treaties. So, but in Brazil, what is being done with it? Is it literally gathering dust someplace? Are there any activist groups who now know that ratification means there's a basis for holding the Brazilian government accountable in their relationship to the very significant Brazilian rifle and gun manufacturing companies, some of which are state-owned? What is going on? Whatever's going on is profoundly gendered. And it is where local politics and international politics meet. And make a list of the major buyers of Brazilian guns and rifles. And then ask, what has this meant to the women living in those countries where the buyers exist? What does it mean for them? As of tonight, I now know you have an intimate relationship with Swedish feminists. Maybe you also have a very close, awkward relationship with feminists in Mali. I don't know where Brazilian guns and rifles are sold, but wherever they're sold, if no effort has been made to measure and enforce that Article 7, you have a relationship to the women in that country. Thanks a lot, everybody.